The first sign of the rot was a text message. Not a single damning message, but a slow poison of them, a constant drip of digital affection that wasn't meant for me. I found them on a Tuesday, a day that had until that moment been aggressively, painfully ordinary. Sarah was asleep, her breathing a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic hammering in my chest. Her phone, usually glued to her hand, lay on the nightstand, a silent black mirror reflecting the dim light of the alarm clock. I hadn't meant to snoop. I've never been that guy. Trust was the bedrock of our marriage, the foundation on which we'd built our lives, our family. But for weeks, a cold unease had been coiling in my gut. A subtle shift in her behavior, a new password on her laptop, a series of late nights at the office that felt off. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of my job was making me see ghosts where there were none. But that night, as I lay awake listening to the rain lash against the window, the unease was a physical presence in the room, a cold, heavy weight on my chest. I picked up her phone. My thumb hovered over the screen, a tremor running through my hand. This was it, the point of no return. The moment I either chose to trust or chose to know. I chose to know. His name was David, a coworker. I'd met him a few times at company picnics, a man with a too-firm handshake and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The messages were a sickening mix of the mundane and the intimate. Inside jokes about their boss, complaints about the coffee in the break room, and then the other stuff. The I can't stop thinking about yous. The last night was amazings. The plans for a future that didn't include me. Each message was a blow, a physical impact that left me breathless. I scrolled back weeks, months, a digital archaeology of my own destruction. The affair had been going on for the better part of a year. A year of lies, of stolen moments, of a secret life lived in the shadows of our marriage. A year while I was working 60-hour weeks to support her while she found herself. A year while I was coaching our son's soccer team and helping our daughter with her homework. A year while I was holding our family together, the unwitting, oblivious glue. I put the phone back on the nightstand, my movements slow, deliberate, as if I were handling a bomb. The room felt different, the air thick with the stench of betrayal. The woman lying next to me, the woman I had loved for 15 years, was a stranger. The life we had built together, a carefully constructed lie. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the text messages burning in my mind, a searing, relentless loop of her infidelity. I thought about our wedding day, the promises we had made, the naive, hopeful kids we had been. I thought about the day Chloe was born, the way Sarah had looked at me over our daughter's tiny, wrinkled face, a look of such profound, unshakable love that it had brought me to my tears. Had any of it been real? When the sun finally rose, casting a pale, watery light into the room, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't unknow what I now knew. The foundation of our marriage hadn't just cracked, it had been systematically, deliberately demolished. I waited until she was awake, until she was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, the picture of domestic tranquility. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. The anger was there, a white-hot inferno in my chest, but it was tempered by a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. "Who's David?" I asked, my voice quiet, almost conversational. The color drained from her face. The coffee cup clattered against the saucer. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She confessed, her voice a flat, emotionless monotone, as if she were reciting a grocery list. She told me it had been going on for a year. She told me she was in love with him. She told me she hadn't known how to tell me. And then the final, brutal blow. She blamed me. It was my fault, she said. I was emotionally unavailable. I was cold. I was distant. I had been so focused on my career, on providing for our family, that I had neglected her. The affair, she explained, wasn't a betrayal but a consequence, a result of my own failings as a husband. The words hung in the air between us, a toxic, suffocating cloud. I looked at her, at the woman I had given everything to, and I felt nothing. The love, the anger, the grief, it all just evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard clarity. I was done. We were done. The house, the kids, the life we had built together, it was all just a pile of rubble at my feet. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I was the only one who was going to be left to clean up the mess. The lawyer, a man with a face like a clenched fist, stared at me across the polished expanse of his mahogany desk. "You're doing what?" he asked, his voice a low growl of disbelief. "I'm giving her the house," I repeated, my own voice sounding strange and distant to my ears. "And primary custody of the kids." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Mark, you know she cheated on you. You have proof. We can bury her. We can take her to the cleaners. You can have the house, the kids, everything." I shook my head. "I don't want to bury her," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I just want this to be over." He didn't understand. None of them did. My friends, my family, they all looked at me with the same mixture of pity and contempt. "You're a fool," my brother had said, his voice laced with a frustration that was almost as painful as Sarah's betrayal. "You're letting her walk all over you." They saw it as a sign of weakness, a surrender. They didn't understand that it was the hardest thing I had ever done. It was an act of self-immolation, a sacrifice of my own anger, my own desire for revenge, for the sake of my children. I wouldn't turn their lives into a battlefield. I wouldn't force them to choose sides. I wouldn't let my pain become their trauma. The divorce was a quiet, bloodless affair. We met in a sterile conference room, the air thick with the unspoken words, the years of shared history that now felt like a foreign country. Sarah, looking radiant and relieved, signed the papers with a flourish, her hand steady, her gaze fixed on the future she had chosen. I signed my name, my own hand trembling slightly, and with that it was over. 15 years of marriage dissolved with the stroke of a pen. I moved into a small, soulless apartment on the other side of town. The walls were thin, the furniture was cheap, and the silence was deafening. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking boxes and navigating the labyrinthine bureaucracy of changing my address, my marital status, my entire life. I was a man adrift, cut loose from the moorings of my own identity. I saw the kids on weekends. The handovers were excruciating, a stilted, awkward dance in the driveway of the house that was no longer mine. Chloe, my bright, bubbly 10-year-old, was quiet and withdrawn, her eyes filled with a confusion that mirrored my own. Ben, my 7-year-old son, a whirlwind of energy and noise, clung to my leg, his small body racked with a silent, shuddering grief. I tried to make our weekends an oasis of normalcy in the desert of our new reality. We went to the park, to the movies, to the zoo. We ate pizza and ice cream and watched cartoons. But the shadow of their mother's absence, of my absence, hung over us, a constant, unspoken presence. Sarah, meanwhile, was living her best life. She and David were a couple now, their love story a triumphant middle finger to the wreckage of our marriage. They went on vacations, they hosted dinner parties, they posted smiling, sun-drenched photos on social media. She was the liberated woman, the brave heroine who had escaped the suffocating confines of a loveless marriage. I was the villain of her story, the cold, emotionally unavailable husband who had driven her into the arms of another man. The whispers and the sideways glances from our mutual friends were a constant, low-grade humiliation. I was the fool, the cuckold, the man who had been too blind to see what was happening in his own home. I endured it all in silence, my face a mask of stoic indifference. I focused on my work, on my kids, on the simple, brutal act of putting one foot in front of the other. One night after dropping the kids back at the house, I sat in my car, the engine off, the darkness pressing in on me. I watched as the lights in the house flickered on, one by one, illuminating the tableau of a happy family that was no longer mine. I saw Sarah, laughing, her head thrown back, her hand on David's arm. I saw my children, my beautiful, innocent children, caught in the crossfire of a war they didn't understand. And in that moment, I felt a surge of rage so pure, so primal, that it almost choked me. I wanted to storm into that house, to drag David out into the street, to scream at Sarah until my throat was raw. I wanted to make them feel a fraction of the pain that was tearing me apart. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, the air rattling in my lungs. I started the car and drove away, the image of that happy family burning in my rearview mirror. I was the quiet demolition, the man who had torn down his own life to save his children from the rubble, and in the lonely silence of my empty apartment, I wondered if it was a price worth paying. The first year was a study in contrasts. My life had shrunk, reduced to the four walls of my sterile apartment and the beige cubicle at my soul-crushing job. Sarah's life, on the other hand, had expanded, blooming in a vibrant, technicolor display of newfound freedom and happiness. She was the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis of our marriage, while I was the discarded, desiccated husk. The weekends with the kids were my only respite, a brief, fleeting glimpse of the life I had lost. But even those were tinged with a sadness so profound it felt like a physical ache. The kids were struggling, caught in the undertow of our divorce. Chloe, my once confident daughter, had become quiet and anxious, her grades slipping, her laughter a rare and precious commodity. Ben, my boisterous son, had started acting out in school, his frustration and confusion manifesting in a series of playground fights and defiant outbursts. I tried to be the stable, reassuring presence they needed, the calm in the storm of their upended lives. But it was hard, so damn hard. Every time I dropped them off at the house that should have been our home, and saw David playing catch with my son in the backyard, a fresh wave of rage and grief would wash over me. He was stepping into my shoes effortlessly, arrogantly, and there was nothing I could do about it. Sarah, meanwhile, was the picture of maternal bliss. She was the fun mom, the cool mom, the mom who threw epic birthday parties and took the kids on spontaneous weekend getaways. She was the hero of her own narrative, the single mother who was doing it all, and doing it with style. She never missed an opportunity to remind me, in a series of passive-aggressive texts and emails, of my own perceived failings as a father. I was the one who had to enforce bedtimes and limit screen time. I was the one who had to deal with the tantrums and the tears. I was the one who had to explain, over and over again, why Daddy didn't live with them anymore. I was the bad cop, the disciplinarian, the ghost at the feast of their new, happy family. The loneliness was a constant companion, a cold, heavy presence in the empty apartment. I ate frozen dinners in front of the TV, the silence broken only by the canned laughter of sitcoms. I went to bed alone, the other side of the bed a vast, empty expanse of cold sheets. I woke up alone, the silence of the morning a stark reminder of everything I had lost. I was a man in stasis, trapped in the amber of my own grief. The world was moving on, but I was stuck, reliving the moment of my betrayal, the quiet demolition of my life, over and over again. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of a world that no longer had a place for me. And then one day something shifted. I was sitting in my cubicle staring at a spreadsheet, the numbers blurring into a meaningless jumble of black and white. I was a cog in a machine, a faceless, nameless drone in a vast, impersonal corporation. And I realized with a sudden, startling clarity that I was done. I was done being the victim. I was done being the ghost. I was done being the man who had let his life be defined by the actions of others. That afternoon, I walked into my boss's office and quit. He was shocked, of course. I was a model employee, a reliable, dependable workhorse. He tried to talk me out of it, to offer me a raise, a promotion, a corner office. I politely declined. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. I walked out of that office building and into the bright, unforgiving sunlight, a man without a job, without a plan, without a future. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The demolition was over. It was time to start rebuilding. The first few months of unemployment were a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The terror came in the dead of night, a cold, creeping dread that would wake me from a restless sleep, my heart pounding, my mind racing with the endless, unanswerable question: what have I done? The exhilaration came in the small, quiet moments of freedom. The long walks in the park, the leisurely afternoons in coffee shops, the simple, profound pleasure of being the master of my own time. I had some savings, enough to keep me afloat for a few months, but I knew I couldn't drift forever. I needed a purpose, a direction, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. The thought of going back to another soul-crushing corporate job was unbearable. I wanted to build something of my own, something that was mine, something that couldn't be taken away from me. I had always been good with my hands. As a kid, I had spent hours in my dad's workshop building model airplanes and rickety go-karts. As an adult, I had been the designated handyman in our marriage, the one who fixed leaky faucets and assembled flat-pack furniture. It was a skill I had always taken for granted, a hobby, a diversion. But now, in the wreckage of my life, it was a lifeline. I started small, doing odd jobs for friends and neighbors. A squeaky door here, a clogged drain there. The work was simple but satisfying. There was a quiet, meditative pleasure in the act of fixing things, of bringing order to chaos. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of pride in my own abilities. The word spread. A friend of a friend needed a new deck. A neighbor's sister wanted her kitchen remodeled. The small, odd jobs grew into bigger, more ambitious projects. I was working harder than I ever had in my corporate life, but it didn't feel like work. It was a passion, a calling, a way of rebuilding my life, one nail, one board, one screw at a time. I also started therapy. It was a difficult, painful process, a journey into the dark, unexplored corners of my own heart. I talked about the betrayal, the anger, the grief. I talked about the loneliness, the shame, the sense of failure that had been my constant companion for the past year. And slowly, painstakingly, I began to heal. My therapist, a kind, gentle woman with a no-nonsense attitude, helped me to see that I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. I had made a choice, a difficult, painful choice to protect my children. And in that choice, there was a quiet, understated strength that I had never recognized in myself. I started to reconnect with old friends, the ones who had been there for me in the immediate aftermath of the divorce, the ones who had seen through Sarah's carefully constructed narrative. We went to baseball games, we played poker, we drank beer and talked about life, love, and the pursuit of happiness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. I was still a work in progress, a man under construction. There were still days when the grief would hit me like a physical blow, when the loneliness would be a palpable presence in the room. But the good days were starting to outnumber the bad. The darkness was starting to recede, replaced by a faint, flickering light on the horizon. One afternoon, I was at the park with the kids pushing Ben on the swings when I saw her. Sarah, she was with David, of course. They were walking hand in hand, a perfect, smiling couple. A year ago, the sight of them would have sent me into a tailspin of rage and despair. But now I felt nothing, a quiet, detached indifference. They were a part of my past, a chapter in a book that I was no longer reading. Ben, oblivious, shouted for me to push him higher. I smiled, a genuine, unforced smile, and gave the swing a mighty shove. He soared into the air, his laughter echoing through the park, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. And in that moment, I knew that I was going to be okay. The new blueprint was in place. The foundation was solid. It was time to start building. The news came, as it always did, through the grapevine. A mutual friend, a woman with a penchant for gossip and a misplaced sense of loyalty, called me under the guise of checking in. "Have you heard about Sarah?" she asked, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. I braced myself. Another passive-aggressive jab, another thinly veiled accusation. "No," I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the weariness that settled over me like a shroud. "David cheated on her," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush of vicarious drama, "with some 20-something from his yoga class. He left her last week, just packed a bag and walked out." I was silent for a moment, the news settling in my gut like a stone. I should have felt something, shouldn't I? A surge of vindication, a triumphant "I told you so." But there was nothing, just a quiet, hollow echo of the pain I had once felt. "Mark, are you there?" "I'm here," I said, my voice hoarse. "I have to go, I'm on a job." I hung up the phone, the silence of my workshop pressing in on me. The irony was not lost on me. The man who had been her knight in shining armor, the one who had rescued her from the suffocating prison of our marriage, had turned out to be just another cheater. The grand, passionate love story that had been the justification for her betrayal had been nothing more than a cheap, tawdry affair. I picked up a piece of sandpaper and began to work on the edge of a cabinet door, the rhythmic, back-and-forth motion a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. I had spent so long imagining this moment, this karmic retribution. I had played it out in my mind 1,000 times, 1,000 different ways. In my fantasies, I was the one to expose him, to reveal his true colors to the world. I was the one who would get to watch as her perfect, new life crumbled around her. But the reality was far less satisfying. There was no triumphant, cinematic moment of revenge, just a quiet, sad affirmation of what I had known all along. David was a man who was incapable of loyalty, of commitment, of love. He was a man who was drawn to the thrill of the chase, the excitement of the forbidden. And once the thrill was gone, once the forbidden had become the mundane, he had moved on to his next conquest. I thought of Sarah, alone in that big, empty house, the house that I had given her, the house that was supposed to be the symbol of her new, liberated life. I thought of her, facing the same betrayal, the same heartbreak, the same gut-wrenching, soul-crushing pain that she had inflicted on me. And I felt pity, a strange, unwelcome pity for the woman who had destroyed my life. I finished the cabinet door, the wood smooth and cool beneath my fingertips. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the workshop floor. I cleaned up my tools, my movements slow, deliberate. The news had unsettled me, not in the way I had expected, but in a way that was deeper, more profound. It was a reminder that the past was never truly past. It was a ghost that haunted the present, a shadow that fell across the future. And I knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that this was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the next chapter. The first crack in her facade had appeared, and I had a feeling that the whole damn thing was about to come crashing down. The storm, when it finally came, was not a sudden, violent squall, but a slow, creeping flood. The first sign of trouble was a series of missed child support payments. Then came the frantic, late-night phone calls, her voice a high, thin wire of panic. "I can't afford the mortgage, Mark," she'd said, her voice cracking. "I lost my job, the market is crashing, I don't know what to do." I listened in silence, the familiar, bitter taste of resentment rising in my throat. I had warned her. My lawyer had warned her. We had both told her that the house was too much for her to handle on her own. But she hadn't listened. She had been blinded by her pride, by her desire to prove that she could make it without me. I offered to help, of course, for the kids. I offered to take over the mortgage payments until she got back on her feet. I offered to let her and the kids move in with me, into my small, two-bedroom apartment. It would have been cramped, it would have been awkward, but it would have been a roof over their heads. She refused. "I'm not a charity case," she'd said, her voice laced with a defensive, wounded pride. "I can handle this on my own." But she couldn't. The bank foreclosed. The house, the one that had been the symbol of her victory, the spoils of her war, was gone. She and the kids were forced to move into a cramped, run-down apartment in a bad neighborhood, a world away from the manicured lawns and picket fences of their old life. The kids were devastated. Chloe, my sensitive, artistic daughter, retreated further into her shell, her drawings becoming dark and chaotic. Ben, my energetic, outgoing son, became sullen and withdrawn, his boisterous energy replaced by a quiet, simmering anger. I did what I could. I took them on weekends, as always. I bought them new clothes and school supplies. I tried to create a sense of normalcy, of stability in the midst of the chaos. But it was like trying to build a sandcastle in a hurricane. One Saturday, I took them to the park, the same park where I had seen Sarah and David together a lifetime ago. The kids were quiet, subdued. The swings were empty, the slide was deserted. The joy had gone out of them. "I hate our new apartment," Chloe said, her voice a small, tight whisper. "It's small and it smells funny." "I miss my old room," Ben said, his lower lip trembling. "I miss my friends." I pulled them close, my heart aching with a love so fierce, so protective, that it felt like a physical pain. "I know," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "I know it's hard, but we're going to get through this. I promise." We sat there for a long time, the three of us, a small, broken family huddled together on a park bench. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was a beautiful sunset, but I couldn't appreciate it. All I could see was the wreckage of my children's lives, the collateral damage of a war they had never asked to be a part of. And in that moment, I hated her. I hated her for her selfishness, for her pride, for her reckless, destructive choices. I hated her for what she had done to our children, for the innocence she had stolen from them. The storm had passed, but the floodwaters were still rising, and I knew with a cold, sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach that we were all about to be swept away. The phone call came on a Tuesday, a day that was, for once, aggressively, beautifully ordinary. I was on a job installing a new set of custom cabinets in a sun-drenched kitchen, the scent of freshly cut wood filling the air. I was happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. A feeling that had been so foreign to me for so long that I almost didn't recognize it. Her name was Emily. She was a landscape architect, a woman with a quick smile, a sharp wit, and a quiet, unassuming strength that I found myself drawn to again and again. We had met through a mutual friend, a blind date that had turned into a second, and then a third, and then a series of comfortable, easy evenings that felt less like dating and more like coming home. She knew about my past, about the divorce, about the betrayal. I had laid it all out for her, a messy, complicated roadmap of my own personal wreckage. She had listened without judgment, her hand resting gently on my arm, her eyes filled with a compassion that was so profound, so genuine, that it had brought me to the verge of tears. She was everything that Sarah was. She was kind, she was emotionally mature, she was stable. With her there were no games, no drama, no hidden agendas. Just a simple, honest connection that felt as solid and as real as the cabinets I was building. So when I saw Sarah's name flash on the screen of my phone, a cold, familiar dread washed over me, a ghost from a past I was so desperate to escape. "I need to see you," she said, her voice a strange mix of desperation and demand. "It's about the kids." We met at a neutral location, a sterile coffee shop halfway between her apartment and mine. She looked diminished. The vibrant, confident woman who had walked out of our marriage with her head held high was gone. In her place was a woman who looked tired and defeated and old. She launched into a long, rambling monologue about the kids, about how much they were struggling, about how much they missed their old life. She painted a picture of a broken family, of two lost and lonely children who needed their parents back together. "We should try again, Mark," she said, her eyes pleading. "For the kids, we can make it work, I know we can." The words hung in the air between us, a desperate, pathetic plea from a woman who had run out of options. She wasn't here for the kids. She was here for herself. She was broke, she was lonely, she was desperate. And she was trying to crawl back into the life she had so carelessly, so cruelly thrown away. I looked at her, at the woman who had been the love of my life, the mother of my children, the architect of my own personal hell. And I felt nothing. The anger, the grief, the hatred, it was all gone. In its place, a quiet, profound indifference. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "but that's not going to happen." I told her about Emily. I told her that I had moved on, that I was happy, that I was building a new life for myself. I told her that our relationship from this point forward was purely about co-parenting. We were a business partnership, and our business was raising our children. She stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief. of wounded pride, of sheer, unadulterated rage. She had expected me to be the same man she had left, the same broken, pathetic fool who would come running back the moment she snapped her fingers. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated my capacity to heal, to grow, to move on. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice trembling with a fury that was as impotent as it was pathetic. She stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone with the dregs of my cold coffee and the ghost of a life I had thankfully, finally, left behind. The return had been a failure. The final desperate gambit of a woman who had lost everything. And as I watched her go, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the final act of this long, tragic play was about to begin. The final act came not with a bang, but with a whimper. A long, rambling, self-pitying whimper that echoed across the digital landscape of our shared social circle. It was a Facebook post, a public confession, a digital mea culpa that was as pathetic as it was predictable. Sarah, in a fit of late-night, wine-fueled desperation, had laid it all bare for the world to see. She wrote about her affair, about the whirlwind romance that had swept her off her feet and blinded her to the quiet, steady love that she had left behind. She wrote about David, the charming, manipulative man who had broken her heart and shattered her illusions. She wrote about the house, the job, the life she had lost. And then she wrote about me. She praised my quiet dignity, my unwavering integrity, my unconditional love for our children. She painted me as a saint, a martyr, the long-suffering husband who had endured her betrayal with a grace and a fortitude that she had only now, in the wreckage of her own life, come to appreciate. It was a masterpiece of self-serving revisionist history, a desperate attempt to rebrand herself as the tragic heroine of her own story, the fallen woman who had seen the error of her ways and was now, finally, ready to atone for her sins. The post went viral, at least in our small, suburban corner of the world. The comments poured in, a chorus of sympathy and support for the poor, heartbroken woman who had lost everything. But then something shifted. The tide began to turn. A few brave souls, the ones who had known the truth all along, began to push back. I seem to remember a different version of this story. One of our mutual friends commented, a woman who had been my staunchest defender from the very beginning. A version where you weren't the victim, but the villain. And with that, the floodgates opened. The whispers and the sideways glances that had followed me for the past 2 years finally found their voice. The truth, the real truth, came out, not in a torrent, but in a slow, steady drip of comments and replies. "He gave you everything, Sarah," another friend wrote. "The house, the kids, a quiet divorce, and you threw it all away for a man who was never worth it." "He's a good man," someone else added. "A good father. He didn't deserve what you did to him." The public validation was a strange, surreal experience. I had never asked for it, never sought it out. I had been content to let my actions speak for themselves, to let my quiet dignity be my only defense. But now, to see it all laid bare, to see the truth finally, unequivocally, triumph over the lies, it was satisfying. It was a quiet victory, a revenge that had been achieved not through action but through inaction. I had not sought to destroy her. I had not sought to expose her. I had simply endured, and in the end that had been enough. I was at home with Emily when the post went up. We were in the kitchen cooking dinner, the easy, comfortable silence between us a testament to the simple, profound beauty of our life together. My phone buzzed with a series of notifications, a digital chorus of vindication. I glanced at the screen, a small, sad smile playing on my lips. "What is it?" Emily asked, her hand on my arm, her eyes filled with a gentle concern. "It's over," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "It's finally over." I showed her the post, the comments, the quiet digital implosion of a life that had been built on a foundation of lies. She read it in silence, her expression unreadable. When she was done, she looked up at me, her eyes shining. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice a soft, gentle whisper. "You're a good man, Mark, and you deserve to be happy." And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of my kitchen, the love of a good woman, and the quiet, satisfying hum of a life well lived, I knew that she was right. The house that spite had built had finally, irrevocably, crumbled to the ground, and I was free.